coronavirus, more than 700,000 were positive. Roughly 40,000 people have died. Tonight's briefing comes as several states prepare to take their first steps toward reopening under guidelines the White House issued last week. Some businesses are set to resume as early as tomorrow. Mark Meredith is standing by at the White House with more. Mark.
Good evening, John. The White House says it's up to America's governors to decide if and when they can reopen. But governors say until more testing is available, that is an extremely difficult decision for them to make. Vice President Mike Pence, he was on Fox News Sunday today, and he tried to reassure Americans that more testing is coming, both on a federal and state level.
Now we've cleared 4 million overall, but at 150,000 tests a day, we think we can double that number by working with governors to activate all of the laboratories in their states around the country that can do coronavirus testing. That would put us at roughly 300,000.
But some governors are pushing back, including some Republican governors saying that their state resources are already exhausted and that they need more help from the federal government. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is among those criticizing the president over testing. She offered to give him a grade today over this outbreak.
We're way late on it, and that is the failure. The president gets an F, a failure on the testing. He doesn't take responsibility. He places blame on others. And that might have been okay for before, but we cannot continue down a path that is, again.
The White House is expected to brief governors again on Monday. So many of these governors are under increasing pressure to reopen their businesses. We have seen protests coast to coast, including ones today out in Colorado, ones in Maryland yesterday. We do expect to get a better idea of what guidelines the administration wants governors to consider when that briefing will be happening. We believe now around 5:45, John. The timing has changed a little bit. We'll let you know if it gets pushed back any further. John.
We will certainly take our viewers there live when it begins. Mark Meredith, I know you'll be in the briefing room. Thank you, Mark.
You bet.
The White House and congressional leaders are reportedly nearing a deal to renew small business relief aid. The government program that kept people on the payroll ran out of money. Now, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer are working on a deal. Chad Pergram is live from Alexandria, Virginia with that. Chad.
John, well, the coffers are basically bare for that small business program, and that's why these talks continue. Republicans have been pushing about $250 billion to plus up that fund. The fund ran out last week, and that's why they think that there is extreme pressure to get a bill through both the House and Senate this week. Here's Vice President Mike Pence.
The negotiations are going on. We're very close, but I think every American has seen the success of the president's program to provide payroll support, and we're going to work to expand that so that no one working in a small business in America would have to worry about missing a paycheck during the trial and difficulty of the coronavirus epidemic.
If they get a deal, the hope is that the Senate could approve the measure via unanimous consent. That way the Senate won't have to bring back everyone to vote so long as no senator objects. However, it may be more complicated to pass the bill in the House, and Democrats like Dan Kildee of Michigan want more help for states in the next bill.
Well, obviously, we are going to have to debate these other issues. We're hoping to be able to do more than one thing at a time. Local governments are struggling. In fact, my county government just laid off numbers in the hundreds, so they're getting hit right away.
Now, the key right now is getting money to these small businesses. It's not good optics for the Democrats to hold out much longer, and that's why people think there might be a pact this week. Now, phase 4, this is really phase 3.5. Phase 4 is something down the road that could include money for state and local governments. Keep in mind that they've already spent about $2.6 trillion in just the past 6 weeks. Members of Congress are very reluctant to move into phase 4 until they see how these programs are working. John?
Chad Pergram from Alexandria, Virginia. Thank you, Chad. And stick around. Fox News Sunday airs after tonight's 2-hour edition of Fox Report. Chris Wallace interviews Vice President Mike Pence and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. This is the Speaker's first interview on Fox since 2017. She discusses the current state of the U.S. amid the pandemic, negotiations to revive small businesses, and much more. A wave of rallies continues across the country with protesters demanding their state governments lift orders closing businesses and public places as soon as possible, even as officials urge caution to prevent a resurgence of the coronavirus. Steve Harrigan is live outside CDC headquarters in Atlanta with reaction as a number of states are set to begin reopening parts of their economies. Steve.
John, the CDC is urging caution and a step-by-step phased approach to reopening the economy. They say in different states or counties, a few things need to be observed before those areas can be reopened. First, they need to see a steady 2-week decline in the number of infections. And second, they need to see the ability to do rapid testing for the virus. Right now, the U.S. is testing about 150,000 people each day. Vice President Pence said that number will soon go up dramatically.
We believe the testing that we have today, Chris, across the country, once we activate all of the labs that can do coronavirus testing, is sufficient for any state in America to move into phase 1.
Some states aren't waiting. They're already going ahead. The beaches in Jacksonville open this weekend to big crowds. South Carolina will open its beaches this week. And some states like Texas will open some stores this week for curbside pickups. There have been protests in 8 different states so far, calling for governors to ease restrictions on the economy. Those states: Arizona, California, Colorado, Maryland, Michigan, Texas, Utah, and Washington. John, back to you.
Steve Harrigan. Steve, thank you. Now to our nation's epicenter of the virus, New York. The number of cases in that state alone making up roughly a third of all the cases in the country. But today, marinas reopened in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, as New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says the state is now on the downside of the apex, with hospitalizations down and an increasing ability to do widespread antibody testing. Aisha Husney is live in New York City with an update on the Northeast. Aisha.
John, the governor says the FDA has approved the state's antibody testing, and that should roll out this week. But the state can only perform about 2,000 tests per day, which, as you know, is just a drop in the bucket when you think about the millions of New Yorkers part of this workforce here. New York is past the plateau, but the governor warning we are not out of the woods just yet.
It's no time to get cocky, and it's no time to get arrogant. And this virus has been ahead of us every step of the way. We have been playing catch up from day one in this situation. So it is no time to relax.
New York still the top state in the country for coronavirus deaths, with more than 17,000. New Jersey at 4,200 and Michigan with more than 2,300. The governors of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts all announcing their appointees to the newly formed Regional Council to reopen and restore the economy. Each state appointed one health expert, one economic development expert, and each governor's chief of staff. The states are trying to combat the pandemic in a more uniform way, like deciding if state parks, marinas, and beaches across the Northeast open or if they close. Now, meanwhile, New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio pushing back on a new call from City Council members to close the city's subway system. An MIT report suggesting that the subway is connected to the spread of the virus in the city. The latest numbers a day ago show 68 public transit workers have now died from COVID-19. De Blasio says he doesn't see yet how he could shut it down, calling on the MTA instead to do a better job limiting the number of people on a subway car at a time. And of course, as the weather warms up, the mayor also calling on the NYPD to increase patrols and enforcement of those social distancing guidelines, asking New Yorkers to report anyone who is not following those rules, and they could face up to $1,000 in fines. John?
Sounds like they're increasing patrols right behind you. Aisha Husney in New York. Aisha, thank you. Meantime, confirmed coronavirus cases in Europe now reaching above 1 million, with more than 100,000 deaths, as both Italy and Spain see a drop in daily infection reports. Spain has the largest case number in Europe, over 195,000. That's second only to the United States. Amy Kellogg is live in Florence, Italy, with the latest. Amy.
Hi, John. Well, that curve of new infections continues to flatten here, but it is still not taking the downward dip that many had hoped it would after 6 weeks of quarantine. So there is a lot of consternation here in Italy about how to move forward. This, as a prominent health advisor today, suggested that Italy is far from ready to enter phase 2. 90% of the population here has not been exposed to coronavirus, i.e. needs to be protected. For sure, schools here won't open until September, whereas France and Germany are planning to reopen next month. And again, it is Easter under lockdown in Europe, Orthodox Easter. Here in Thessaloniki, Greece, you see people cheering from their balconies. Fireworks last night when normally tens of thousands would be out at midnight mass. And there were some surreal scenes in Ukraine at Kiev's Pecherskaya Lavra. Ambulances coming to pick up coronavirus patients at the monastery part of the compound. Worshippers going to pray at the church. And finally, Russian President Vladimir Putin gave an Easter address today. The Russian patriarch asked people to pray at home, but Putin said Russia is cooperating with foreign friends and colleagues to help understand the crisis, adding, quote, "The situation is under complete control." He also said the resurrection of Christ is a symbol of the triumph of life over everything against it. John, Russia only reporting about 350 deaths so far from coronavirus. So either they've been extremely lucky, extremely efficient, or their numbers are just not accurate. John.
Amy Kellogg from Italy. Amy, thank you. And in the Middle East, the Israeli government loosening coronavirus safety restrictions and partially reopening stores. This comes just days after priests in Jerusalem held Easter Mass in empty churches. Meantime, China is not reporting any new deaths in recent days, as U.S. investigators are looking at where and how the outbreak originated. Trey Yingst is live from our Jerusalem bureau with the latest on that. Trey.
John, good evening. It's a mixture of positive and negative updates when you look at the spread of COVID-19 across the Middle East. We did see some striking images, though, today out of Turkey, that country struggling with a rise in new cases, but fresh video shows a 1,000-bed hospital actually being built on the grounds of an airport in Istanbul. The government issued a lockdown this weekend for 31 provinces and put into place new age restrictions on who can go outside. Turkey's health minister announced over the weekend the total number of positive COVID-19 results rose to over 85,000. Turkey has overtaken Iran now for the most number of cases in the Middle East. The Iranians are reopening some parts of their country, though more than 1,000 new tests are coming in each day with positive results. The Iranian economy does remain under heavy international economic sanctions. The Iranians reporting over 82,000 total cases, though that number is likely much higher according to analysts. Finally, here in Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu lifted some restrictions today, allowing the countrywide workforce to operate at 30%. Civilians will now be allowed to leave their homes up to 500 meters, that's around a third of a mile, though Israeli schools and large shops will remain closed indefinitely. The Prime Minister used the announcement today to thank those who have worked to lower the Israeli death rate and the new number of cases. Now, all of these updates do come as China reported just 16 positive results yesterday. We do know from a Fox News report that the U.S. government is looking into that lab in Wuhan, China, to get more information on when exactly this outbreak started and if it did indeed start in Wuhan. John?
Trey Yingst from Jerusalem. Trey, thank you.
Let's see what happens with their investigation, but we're doing investigations also. If it was a mistake is a mistake. But if they were knowingly responsible, yeah, then there should be consequences.
The U.S. now conducting a full-scale investigation into whether the coronavirus leaked from a Wuhan laboratory where it reportedly was being studied. The lab's vice director responding, saying, quote, "As people who carry out viral study, we clearly know what kind of research is going on in the Institute and how the Institute manages viruses and samples. As we said early on, there is no way this virus came from us. We have a strict regulatory regimen. We have a code of conduct for research, so we are confident of that." Here to talk about it is Gordon Chang, Senior Fellow at the Gatestone Institute, Asia Analyst, Foreign Affairs Journalist, and author of The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, what do you think about those denials from the vice director of that laboratory?
Well, we know, John, that in 2018, a State Department team toured the Wuhan Institute of Virology and found shocking deviations from safety protocols. So there's a real concern that although it's a P4 lab, that's the highest level of security, they probably were operating somewhere at P2 or maybe even lower. And that really means that they were handling dangerous pathogens with inadequate procedures. So I don't put much stock in the denial from the Institute's director.
And it's not the only microbe research lab in Wuhan, is it?
Yeah, there's a smaller one, which is closer to the center of town, which is a P2 facility. People have been focusing, though, on the Wuhan Institute of Virology as being the source, because this one was where coronaviruses were being studied. Before they took it down, their website said that they were actually stored more than 1,500 strains of coronavirus. So it is most likely that it came from that particular facility.
Peter Navarro, one of the president's top advisors, is holding China responsible for the outbreak. Here's what he said on Sunday Morning Futures this morning.
First of all, the virus was spawned in China. Second of all, they hid the virus behind the shield of the World Health Organization. The third thing they did was basically hoard personal protective equipment, and now they're profiteering from it. And what we know is that the ground zero for this virus was within a few miles of that lab. I think it's incumbent on China to prove that it wasn't that lab. So that's number one.
China has a lot of questions to answer, and it appears that a lot of nations want to ask them those questions, Gordon.
Yes, it's not just us. What we're seeing in Europe, for instance, is a growing skepticism of China's claims on the coronavirus. And this is important because if you look back at China's relations with the West, it has gotten a lot of friends among our allies on the continent of Europe and even in England. And so there's really now a new concern about China's positions. And that is important because this is people, I think, that are starting to follow President Trump's lead in expressing deep concern about what China has been doing. And Navarro is absolutely right. China had hid the coronavirus from the world for about 5.5 weeks. And during that time, it tried to convince the world that it was not human-to-human transmissible when Chinese leaders, in fact, knew that it was.
And they shut down their internal aviation, their flights within China, while they continued to let flights travel internationally from China. Gordon Chang, we're going to have to say goodbye, but always good to talk with you. Thank you. It's about 18 minutes now past the top of the hour as we wait for President Trump and the White House task force to update the country this hour on the administration's coronavirus response. That briefing set to begin about half an hour from now. We will bring you the president's remarks once he takes to the podium, and we will look at the next steps to safely reopen our nation's battered economy.